brothers, father, son, they all go up together in September of 1864 at Trenton, New Jersey. They join the 41st. Much like a white unit, family members going together. And who here has seen the film 12 Years a Slave? If you have, the main character in that film, Solomon Northrop, wrote a memoir of his experiences, of course, that the film is based on. He was from Saratoga County, New York. Well, I did some research, and there were 50,000 people in Saratoga County, New York at that time, only 700 of whom were black. Small, tight community. And there are two soldiers, Jerome Mott and Michael Wicks, from Saratoga, who both enlisted in the 8th United States Colored Infantry, and I'm guessing that they didn't know Solomon Northrop. They had certainly heard of him, and it was certainly in the back of their minds what had happened to him as they walked this war. And now for the foreigners. Antonio Edwards, born in the Cape Verde Islands, Portuguese territory. He's a sailor. Ended up at Augusta, Maine, and joined the 41st United States Colored Infantry as a substitute in October of 1864. He's here. James Bradshaw, born in Calcutta, India, also a sailor. Volunteered in Philadelphia. And I kid you not, Juan Lodigo from Nanking, China, enlisted in 31st United States Colored Infantry in New Haven, Connecticut, late 1864 as a substitute. Hopefully he saw his money as well, putting his life on the line. And in terms of the officers, you mentioned Colonel born in Hawaii. Well, goes from there as well. Wilhelm von Bechtold, Hesse Darmstadt, Germany. Before Germany's unified, it's all these little states and principalities. He's a soldier in his prince's army back home. And whether he's an abolitionist or just a soldier of fortune, it's hard to say, but he will cross the Atlantic. He will join the 45th United States Colored Infantry as a captain of Company A, and a month after Appomattox, war is basically over. His job is done as far as he can tell, and he goes back home. Join his home nation's army once again. So you see how diverse this group of soldiers is in terms of where these men come from and their personal stories. What are they going to do here? What are they going to do at Appomattox? To kind of step back for a moment, I want you to imagine it is the winter of 1864, 1865. The siege of Petersburg, 100 miles east of us, is in full swing. Grant and his federal forces, including thousands of United States Colored troops, these 7 regiments as well, have been trying to cut off the supply lines for Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Railroads, roads, bringing in all the food and supplies Lee's Army needs. And overall, this siege has been going for 9.5 months. Trench warfare, similar to World War I. That's what these men are going to be exposed to. They're in the trenches outside of Richmond. Siege lines spread up that far too. It's freezing cold, wet, nasty winter, muddy trenches, muddy camps. They are manning those trenches, performing a lot of labor. Even by this late stage of the war, these soldiers are used heavily for fatigue detail, for labor duties. Digging especially at a place called Dutch Gap Canal, trying to change the course of the James River to get around some Confederate artillery. Nasty business at that time of the year. They're suffering from sickness and disease, particularly pneumonia. They still don't have enough officers. All that's about to change. They're going to be moving very fast. Now, Grant, the last week of March, is going to make his final moves at Petersburg to finish this off. It's gone on long enough. He's just waiting on the roads to dry. Doesn't wait long enough, as it turns out. During this campaign, the mud, in some cases, is going to be knee-deep on these central Virginia roads of red clay. If you come out to the national park, you can see a little bit of that mud yourself and maybe take some home as a souvenir. I know I certainly have. And then on March 27th, 2 divisions of the 24th Corps, it's the Army of the James we're talking about. The Army of the Potomac, the Army of the James, those are Grant's 2 main forces outside of Petersburg. The Army of the James is divided between the 24th and 25th Corps. The 25th Corps is all black. The 24th Corps is all white. The 2nd Division of the 25th Corps, 9 regiments, including the 7 we're dealing with today, are going to be involved in the final movements of Petersburg. General William Birney is their commander. He was actually born in Alabama, but he's the son of an abolitionist. His family's politically active. He's kind of an outsider in a very conservative, very democratic army at that point, with a capital D. And he's in charge of these men. It's his mission to cross the James River with General Edward Ward, commander of the Army of the James, and fill in the line outside of Petersburg that is being vacated by more Union infantry going off to the south and west to get around Lee's army finally. They man the trenches, they're exposed to artillery and sharpshooter fire, they suffer some casualties, nearly 100 during that week. And on April 2nd, when the Union 6th Corps attacks and breaks through the Confederate line, what's now Pamplin Historical Park, south of Petersburg, 24th Corps, and 25th Corps following right behind them. 24th Corps, the white soldiers will attack a place called Fort Gregg, often known as the Alamo of the Confederacy. They suffer heavy casualties taking that Confederate position, buys Lee enough time to get out of Petersburg at night. The black soldiers were held back from mounting a final assault on the Petersburg defenses. The next morning, on April 3rd, there's some of the first Union soldiers to march in to Petersburg. First Union soldiers seen there in 4 years that were prisoners. Happened to be out of the area. Must have been quite a sight. The same is happening up in Richmond. Black soldiers, some of the first troops to enter the former Confederate capital, went in falls at the same time on April 3rd. Now, for the next few days of the campaign, as Lee tries to escape to the south, Grant's able to cut him off and proceed in the Appomattox campaign, which I won't go into detail on for you today. But the USCT's, Birney's division, these 9 regiments, are used to, quote-unquote, secure the South Side Railroad, running from Petersburg toward Burkeville. What that means, basically, is they're guarding it, but they're also helping repair it. You see, the railroads had different gauges. The United States Military Railroad, the width between the tracks, Grant wanted to use the South Side Railroad as a supply line, but it was a 5-foot gauge. The U.S. Military Railroad's a 4-foot, 8.5 gauge. That's not going to work. So what Grant has is the entire 9th Corps and part of the 25th Corps literally picking up the rails, moving them a little bit, and putting them back down. That's what these soldiers are doing for at least 3 days. Now, April 7th, USCTs are going to make it as far as Farmville, just 30 miles from us. They rejoin with the 24th, 25th Corps soldiers under Ord there, and at that point, they get reorganized. General Birney, I couldn't come across exactly why, but he is relieved of duty and sent back to Petersburg. He's not going to be with his soldiers here at Appomattox. He's not going to command them here. 2 brigades under Colonel Ulysses Doubleday, including the 8th, 41st, 45th, and 127th, are going to be attached to one of the divisions in the all-white 24th Corps. And the 3rd Brigade under Colonel William Woodward, 29th, 31st, 116th, will be attached to Turner's division, the other white division of the 24th Corps. Once again, the Army of the James is integrated. It hadn't been for months, now it is once again. And they will move forward together as one unit. Now, the 2 regiments that don't make it to Appomattox, who probably should have, and I'm sure they were quite upset by it, knowing they did not get to participate in the final battle that trapped Lee's army, were the 7th and 109th. They don't reach Appomattox until April 10th. They missed it by 1 day. Now, stepping back to the 8th of April, armies are racing for Appomattox Station, moving very, very quickly. Lee trying to get his supplies there on the railroad, Grant trying to cut him off. The cavalry under Custer is going to get there. Battle of Appomattox Station occurs, and all that day, the 8th, the Army of the James, including these 7 United States Colored Troop regiments, are making the hardest march of their lives, of their military service. Over 30 miles in less than 20 hours, over the same muddy roads that both armies are contending, just as fast as any of the Confederate forces marched. And apparently, they did a very good job keeping up and staying together. Lieutenant Colonel James Gibbon, the 127th United States USCT, said this about officers and men. The majority of the officers proved themselves worthy of the trust reposed in them. The men, though short of rations, they're running out of food just like the Confederates are, were almost always worn out with fatigue, moved on without a murmur, as long as there was an enemy to follow. These men joined the Union Army not only, of course, to preserve the Union, but to emancipate those still held in bondage for freedom. And here they are, chasing after the most important Confederate army during the war. They're pumped. They're ready to go. And they make this march with no trouble. Chief Surgeon of the 25th Corps, Surgeon C.P. Heikold, had this to say: in an experience of more than 3 years, I never witnessed greater powers of endurance. There was no straggling, and the men were constantly in the best of spirits. They're all keeping up. They want in on this final battle to finish this war. They will arrive at Appomattox Station, or just a few miles short of it, about 1:30 a.m. on the morning of April 9th, the day of the surrender. That morning, as soon as the soldiers could see, and any of you who were out at the National Park yesterday morning, you witnessed a little bit of this, a demonstration by the reenactors out there. Lee realizes he's on the corner, but he decides to make one final assault to the west of the village of Appomattox Courthouse. The road is blocked by a small force of Union cavalry off their horses, dug in, blocking the way along the Richmond-Lynchburg Stage Road. Small ridgeline there to the west of town is where this is going to occur. Confederate infantry and cavalry will attack as soon as they can see on the morning of April 9th, a little before 8 a.m. They'll sweep that Union cavalry off the ridge down the road, opening their escape route as far as they can tell. Word goes back, road's open, let's go. What they don't realize is not only is more Union cavalry arriving, but the Army of the James, including these USCTs, are pouring onto the field as well, getting there as quickly as they possibly can during this battle back to their camp. An example of what it was like to be one of those white cavalrymen who witnessed what's about to happen comes from Captain Newman Tenney of the 2nd Ohio Cavalry. His men are trying to stem this Confederate assault. He says, the morning of the 9th came. The cavalry was being pushed back rapidly towards the station. The boys were falling, scores of them. Why was it with victory so near? When over the hill, a dark column was espied coming down the road in close column in quick time. What a relief from the awful suspense. What cared we for the color or race of those men who brought relief to us? We saw courage and determination in their coal black faces. What he's talking about is the arrival of 6 of those 7 USCT units that we discussed. The 7th, the 127th USCT to be exact, are left a few miles in the rear to guard the wagon train. They're not going to witness what's about to happen, but they're very close. Now, Doubleday's brigade is the first to arrive, the 8th, 41st, 45th. They will move slightly to the left of what's going on. This is occurring between Grant's headquarters and where the Museum of the Confederacy is located. If you're familiar with that area, just about a mile west of the village of Appomattox Courthouse. Confederate cavalry is trying to skirt around to their left. They form into line and push that Confederate cavalry back. And Colonel Armstrong of the 8th USCT had this to say about this initial fight against the Confederate cavalry. Early we advanced. Our skirmish lines met those of the enemy. We expected a fight. I never felt more like it in my life. A few bullets whistling around, a few shells passed over. We rush in, our left in front, a hurrying deployment of 2 companies, a fine march into the field by the rear rank. They basically went backwards into this engagement accidentally. They're so excited. The Rebs gave way, and all was quiet. While Doubleday's brigade pushes to the left and drives back the Confederate cavalry, in that area, near the Coleman farm, where Hannah Reynolds had been mortally wounded just a little while before, by the way. Woodward's brigade, with the 29th, 31st, and 116th United States Colored Infantry, those guys from Kentucky especially, they move to the right. And they get in between two divisions of white soldiers of the 24th Corps, insert themselves right in the middle of that line, and they begin advancing directly east toward the rest of Lee's army. They're advancing from what is now Grant's headquarters towards what's now the North Carolina Monument, right across those open fields. One Confederate soldier, seeing this advance, said that it looked like a giant blue checkerboard, with the white and black Union soldiers advancing toward them together. Imagine seeing that from the perspective of a Confederate soldier. From this point, that road, Lee's escape route, is blocked. This final battle for Lee to get his army out has failed. And right in the thick of it are the USCTs. Major Alexander Johnson of the 116th said this about this moment. He said, dismounted cavalry, retreating from the front, broke through the column, saying as they passed, give it to them, boys, there's too many for us. The column reached the pike, stage road, if you will, when it halted and faced to the front. Skirmishers were deployed on the front. As we advanced, the Confederate skirmishers retired. After advancing some 800 yards, the brigade was ordered to halt and form into a solid line of battle. Some 800 yards away was the Army of Northern Virginia, with its battle lines awaiting us. And at that moment, Robert E. Lee will order those troops to fall back through the village, across the Appomattox River. The white flag will begin going out very soon thereafter, certainly before 11 a.m. This whole battle lasted less than 3 hours. The USCTs, those 7 units, were right there at the critical moment, blocking that road. This is probably the most decisive military engagement of the Civil War, because this battle will lead Lee's army being encircled, will lead him to decide to surrender to Grant that afternoon at the McLean House. It's directly related. It's the only time in the entire Civil War when a major field army, not a garrison stuck in a fort or a city, but a major field army, is cornered and captured. And it happened right here at Appomattox. Now, the casualties these men suffer are mercifully very light. The Battle of Appomattox Courthouse cost both sides a total of 700 men killed or wounded. The USCTs suffered 3 of those casualties, 3 men wounded. One of them is an officer, Captain John Falconer, Company A of the 41st. He's shot through the side and will die 2 weeks later. Private Thomas Crawford, the 41st, lost an eye in this battle. And Private William Johnson of the 8th U.S. United States Colored Infantry will be wounded but recover and rejoin his unit. Now, with Lee's surrender, with the ending of the war in Virginia, and the role played in it by the USCTs, these agents of emancipation, if you will, these black soldiers, have put teeth into what emancipation means. It's only through federal military victory and the surrender of Lee's army and of the subsequent Confederate armies that emancipation can be realized for slaves in Virginia and other parts of the South with the arrival of the federal troops. With the passage of the 13th Amendment and the ratification of it in December is a direct result of it as well. Now, following their time here at Appomattox, this exciting campaign and the battle they were involved in, these men will spend 2 days, a day and a half at Appomattox before they once again turn around and on the morning of April 11th march all the way back to Petersburg, except when they were marching out, it wasn't raining. When they marched back to Petersburg, it is raining for days after the surrender. And all of you who've seen the muddy roads, you can imagine what that experience was like. They said it was worse than the coming out. The going back was much, much worse. They do it in 6 days, at 100 miles. Get back to Petersburg. They will spend roughly a month in that area between Richmond and Petersburg doing garrison duty, occupying the former Confederate capital. And in late May, a decision will be made. It's going to affect many of these soldiers' lives in the months after Appomattox.